Good morning. Before we get started, do you remember the last three memory verses? Proverbs 3 and 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not into thine own understanding. Psalms 105, 42a. For he remembered his holy promises. And 2 Thessalonians 3 and 3. For the Lord is faithful, who shall establish you and keep you from evil. Before we get started with today's Bible story, Abraham offers Isaac. Think about these questions. Number 1. Why did God ask Abraham to give Isaac back to him as an offering? Number 2. How did Abraham feel about God's strange request? Number 3. Who went with Abraham on his journey to the place God had appointed? Number 4. Who carried the wood up the mountain to place on the altar? Number 5. What did Isaac ask his father as they climbed the mountain together? Number 6. How did God provide an animal for the offering? Abraham offers Isaac. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. God knew how much Abraham loved Isaac. As the boy grew, Abraham loved him even more. Isaac was the child God had promised, and Abraham loved the boy as a gift from God. Abraham looked forward to the time when Isaac would become a man and have children also. These children would grow up and become the fathers of more people, even as God had promised. As Isaac grew, Abraham taught him to know and worship God. Perhaps he took Isaac and he offered gifts upon the altar. Abraham told Isaac that God would accept the gifts and hear prayer if one did what was right and trusted in him. The people in Abraham's day thought they must offer a sacrifice to their God, the dearest things they had, even their own children. God could never be pleased with such sacrifices. He wanted to teach Abraham this lesson and also to test his love for God. So God called to Abraham, and Abraham answered, Behold, here am I.
God said, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go into the land of Moriah. There give him back to me as an offering upon an altar, which you will build at the place I will show you. Abraham did not know why God asked him to do this. God had promised to make of Isaac a great nation. How could God keep his promise if Isaac were offered upon an altar? Abraham did not understand, but he was sure God knew best. He would obey. It would take several days to get to the land of Moriah. Abraham got ready to go. He called 2 manservants and Isaac. After saddling his donkey, they started away. They took wood and fire to burn the offering. For 2 days they traveled. At night they slept under the tree.
On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the mountain where God wanted the altar built. Abraham told the servant, Stay here with the donkey while Isaac and I go to worship. Isaac carried the wood on his shoulder, and Abraham took the vessel of fire. As they climbed the mountain together, Isaac began to wonder why his father had not bought a lamb for an offering. He said, My father, here are wood and fire for the altar, but where is the lamb for an offering? Abraham replied, God will provide a lamb. When they reached the place God had chosen, Abraham built an altar, laid wood upon it, tied Isaac's hand and feet, and placed him upon the altar. Then a loud voice called out, Abraham. The old man stopped to listen.
The angel of God said, Do no harm to Isaac. Now I know that you love God even better than you love your child. Untie his hands and his feet and let him go. At this, Abraham saw a ram caught by his horns in the bushes. He offered the ram instead of his son Isaac. Afterward, the angel called to Abraham again and said, Because you have given me your dearly loved child, I will surely bless you and cause your family to be as many as the stars in the heavens and as the sand of the sea. And I will bless all nations of the earth through your family because you have obeyed my voice. It was a happy father and son who walked down the mountain. Now Abraham knew that he had pleased God. And Isaac knew that his life was precious in God's sight. Abraham called the place where he had built the altar, "The Lord will provide." The two returned to the servants who were waiting and went back to their home. Here Abraham lived for many years.
Now let's answer the questions from earlier. Number 1. Why did God ask Abraham to give Isaac back to him as an offering? To test Abraham's love and obedience. Number 2. How did Abraham feel about God's strange request? He felt he should obey God. Number 3. Who went with Abraham on his journey to the place God had appointed? 2 servants and Isaac. Number 4. Who carried the wood up the mountain to place on the altar? Isaac. Number 5. What did Isaac ask his father as they climbed the mountain together? Where is the lamb for an offering? Number 6. How did God provide an animal for the offering? He caused the ram to become entangled in the bushes. This week's memory verse is Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 28a and c. Be careful to obey all of these commandments, so that it may always go well with you and your children after you. Here's part 2 of today's lesson. Think about it. Awesome obedience.
A few centuries before Christ, Alexander the Great conquered almost all of the known world with his military strength, cleverness, and diplomacy. One day, Alexander and a small company of soldiers approached a strongly defended walled city. Alexander, standing outside the walls, raised his voice, demanding to see the king. The king, approaching the battlements above the invading army, agreed to hear Alexander's demands. "Surrender to me immediately," commanded Alexander. The king laughed. "Why should I surrender to you?" he called down. "We have you far outnumbered. You are no threat to us."
Alexander was ready to answer this challenge. "Allow me to demonstrate why you should surrender," he replied. Alexander ordered his men to line up single file and start marching. He marched them straight toward a sheer cliff that dropped hundreds of feet to rocks below. The king and his soldiers watched in shocked disbelief as one by one Alexander's soldiers marched without hesitation right off the cliff to their deaths. After 10 soldiers had died, Alexander ordered the rest of his men to stop and to return to his side. The king and his soldiers surrendered on the spot to Alexander the Great.
Application. The king and his soldiers realized that nothing would stop the eventual victory of men actually willing to give their lives for their leader. Are you as dedicated to obeying Christ's command as Alexander's soldiers were to obeying Alexander? Are you willing to be committed to Christ? Think how much influence Christians could have in the world if they took seriously the commands of Jesus. Be careful to obey. The rest of the verse is the reason why, so that it may always go well with you and your children after you, because you will be doing what is good and right in the eyes of the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 12:28.
This concludes our lesson for today.